This happened on October 18, 2013. The leader of the notorious Tijuana cartel and one of the most dangerous men in Mexico at the time. In front of everyone present during the celebration of his 63rd birthday. Today we know that the killer clown was Jesus Rodrigo Riga Gambo, the highest-ranking hitman of the Sinaloa cartel, better known as El Chino Anthrax. And today I'll tell you his story from the very beginning. Jesus Rodrigo Riga Gamboa had a surprisingly normal and privileged upbringing. He was born on June 15 in the city of Culiacan in the heart of the state of Sinaloa, Mexico. His family was respected and somewhat wealthy. His father was a government official and his mother a scientist. However, there was a problem from the very beginning and it had a direct bearing on Riga's neighbors. You see, the family that lived next door to Riga and in his childhood was Zambada. And if you are not familiar with this name, I will explain it for you. Ishmael El Mayo Zambada Garcia was one of the 4 men who founded the Sinaloa cartel 35 years ago in 1987. When El Chapo was still active, Zambada led his own group. The only reason you didn't hear much about him was because unlike El Chapo, who loved being the center of attention, Zambada was always a ruthlessly cunning and shadowy figure. Now let's return to the history of Riga. El Mayo Zambada had 3 sons and they were about the same age as Riga. And because they were his neighbors, he grew up with them. Many years later, in the courtroom, Riga's mother will say the following about her son's relationship with Zambada. They went to school together, they played sports together, they attended social events together, they became best friends. No one knows how much influence the Zambada brothers had on Riga, but you should know that Zambada did not shield his sons from his cartel business. It was a family business. However, as Riga grew older, he showed no signs that he would lead a life of crime. He tried to become a pilot but failed his medical examination because he had a skin disease. Riga then turned his attention to other things. He decided to pursue a degree in architecture. While studying in college, 2 events happened to him quite quickly that changed his life. Firstly, he had a daughter, and secondly, he got married. These new responsibilities forced him to quit his studies and it was then that the situation took a dramatic turn for the worse. Life as a father, husband, and breadwinner proved incredibly difficult for Riga, and when it became unbearable, he turned to his childhood friends, the Zambada brothers, for help. One of the brothers, Vicente Zambada, also known as El Vicentilli. I decided to help Riga in the only way available to him by introducing him to the cartel business. At first, Riga was assigned small, harmless tasks, such as delivering cargo and monitoring the delivery of goods to their destinations, and when he did an excellent job with these tasks, El Vicentilli introduced him to the drug trade. It was during this time that Riga's creativity came into the spotlight. He came up with an ingenious method for transporting cocaine and marijuana shipments across the border. His plan included creating a network of legal businesses that needed supplies to America from Mexico. He then created several legal transport companies that delivered these goods. This way he could legally smuggle trucks across the border because they had the proper paperwork and the Border Patrol had no idea that each truck had tons of drugs hidden in it. Riga immediately became a major player in the Sinaloa cartel, attracting the attention of El Vicentilli's father, the elder Zambada, El Maya, who began to like him. Somewhere around this moment, something broke inside Riga, or maybe it always was because it was then that he began to show an insatiable thirst for blood. At that time, he voluntarily participated in the most terrible operations of the cartel. Riga was ready to kill people. However, it was what he did with the bodies of murdered people that turned him into a notorious and feared urban legend. Mutilated bodies were hung as warning banners in public places throughout Sinaloa. There were rumors in the city that anyone who died at the hands of Riga continued to suffer in the afterlife because of what was done to his body. Unsurprisingly, El Maya took advantage of Arechiga's penchant for violence and included him in his retinue of feared killers. More importantly, he became the personal bodyguard of El Vicentilli of Los Anthrax. Sometime around 2008, Arechiga was relieved of his bodyguard duties and given a new, possibly more important assignment by El Maya. A civil war was brewing within the Sinaloa cartel. The Sinaloa cartel's ally broke away and started a war. It was Bertrand Leva's organization. And while their fight was with El Chapo, El Maya found himself in the middle of the action and was forced to join the war. The situation was ideal for Arechiga. He formed his own armed group for the Sinaloa cartel and named it Anthrax Los Angeles, after the notoriously deadly bacteria. Among the members of his team was his right-hand man, formerly Velasquez Valenzuela, aka El Sagenta Phoenix. Jesus Pina, also known as L20. Rafael Guadalupe Felix Nouns, also known as Samgita Anthrax, and others. And each participant was given a ring. As the leader of this assassination squad, Arechiga became known as El Chino Anthrax, which means anthrax in Chinese. They had two jobs, one was to protect El Maya Zambada, and the second was to fight everyone who dared to stand in their way. For Arechiga, his assassination team was practically anyone. The Los Angeles Anthrax wreaked havoc in Sinaloa, during a 5-year period of incessant violence, and Arechiga turned into a monster. Every time they encountered Beltran Leyva, it was a bloodbath with casualties on both sides, including civilians. Meanwhile, the Mexican army joined in and attempted to suppress both groups. After some time, members of the rival cartel got tired of this and began to destroy members of Los Anthrax. Meanwhile, Arechiga began to experience an unhealthy liking for publicity. As Arechiga's gang suffered blow after blow, his leadership began to look shaky in the eyes of El Maya. On November 1, 2011, Los Anthrax suffered one of its biggest blows when one of the team's leaders, Francisco Archer Bayo, known to everyone as Pancho, was killed during a mini-football game in Julio Cana by rival gangsters from Los Mazarlecos, a security force divisions of the Beltran Leyva organization. The ensuing acts of retaliation took place in various cities of Sinaloa over the following months. Bodies hung from bridges, civilians were shot in playgrounds. Meanwhile, while Arechiga was taking revenge on his enemies, he also picked up another dubious hobby, being an influencer on social media. As crazy as it may sound, Arechiga flaunted his wealth on social media and basically became a media influencer. He made millions of dollars from the cartel and, not surprisingly, spent these millions on luxury cars, renting expensive yachts, buying expensive watches and houses. Several ballads were written about Arechiga, some of which described him as an elegant and fit man who enjoyed his sports cars, yachts and drank champagne. And he posted it all on a social network, exposed it to the whole world. He even posed with famous celebrities like Paris Hilton and others, and although he may have hidden his face to hide his identity, security agencies around the world began to learn his stories and it took them little time to figure out a way to catch him. You see, while Arechiga may have made an effort to hide his identity, his signature Los Angeles ring was on his finger in every photo. He never took it off, and it was an oversight that ultimately led to his downfall. On December 31, just a few months after killing the head of the Tijuana cartel, Arechiga decided to take a vacation. He flew from Mexico to the Netherlands and was arrested by Dutch police immediately after landing. A few days earlier, the US had warned the Dutch that a 33-year-old Mexican national, who also happened to be a drug lord, would be arriving in their country in a few days, and they wanted him arrested. And so immediately after Arechiga landed, they established his identity and detained him. However, the identification process was not easy because Arechiga was flying under a false name, the name of a dead person. He also grew a beard and slightly altered his face through plastic surgery. What helped authorities identify him was the ring he foolishly wore on his finger. Extradition and trial. On July 10, 2014, Arechiga was extradited to the United States. The next day he was formally charged with drug trafficking. At first, Arechiga was stubborn and did not plead guilty to the charges brought against him for selling drugs. But after several hearings, Arechiga gave in. On March 20, 2015, he pleaded guilty and admitted to being involved in the supply of cocaine and marijuana into the United States and facilitating violent acts while working for the Sinaloa cartel. This change of heart was suspicious and many questions arose at that time. He was tortured. Why did he suddenly confess? What offer could the prosecutors make him that he couldn't refuse? At the end of the trial, this proposal became abundantly clear. When he was given an incredibly lenient sentence, only 6 years in an American prison and an additional 5 years of probation. For 6 years, El Chino reported on almost everyone for anthrax while cooperating with the U.S. Attorney's Office, naming names and addresses and exposing the forms of activity of the Sinaloa cartel in the United States. The information he shared was so useful that it greatly contributed to the destabilization of the main parts of the Sinaloa cartel. Meanwhile, everyone including El Maya was fully aware that their golden boy had turned into a rat. The final end. On March 3, 2020, Arechiga was paroled and placed under house arrest in the United States for obvious reasons. The conditions of his parole limited him to staying within 500 meters of his home in California. However, a few months later in May, he escaped parole and returned to Culiacan to live with his sister and her husband. Not surprisingly, 10 days later on the night of May 14, 2020, Arechiga, his sister and her husband were in the house, when suddenly armed masked men burst into the area and started shooting at them. Arechiga returned fire, but eventually ran out of ammunition and they were all taken hostage. And the next morning, Arechiga's body, as well as his sister and her husband, were found wrapped in cloth in a black SUV. All of them were tortured and shot. There has been much speculation about who may have ordered the attack on El Chino. Some say they were probably members of the Tijuana cartel seeking revenge for the murder of their boss. Others point fingers at the remaining members of the Beltran Leyva organization, which has already been disbanded by the Mexican military. However, whoever this attack was took place deep within Sinaloa territory and there is no way anyone could have carried out such an attack without the side of El Mayo or senior cartel members. And several months after the attack, when there was no reprisal or action or revenge for the murder of one of the former high-ranking employees, it became clear that El Maya must have been the one who ordered the killing. If he didn't do it, he definitely allowed it to happen. For them, El Chino Sibirskaya Yazova was a traitor who sold them, and in any world, business or crime is unforgivable. So why did Arechiga leave the safety of his probation in the US to return to Sinaloa, where he is wanted? Did he really think that everything he did would be so easily forgiven or that El Chino was just stupid?